Next up, it's my pleasure to introduce Greg Honig, Chief Commercial Officer of Sherritt International Corporation, for a fireside chat discussion with my colleague, Greg Doyle, Director Investment Banking at National Bank Financials. Gentlemen.
Morning, Greg. Great to see you. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
So starting off, there may be some members of the audience that aren't familiar with Sherritt, so maybe you could provide a bit of a brief introduction on the business, and we can take it from there.
Sounds good. I think Sherritt's a name that's actually quite well known in terms of the fact that it has over a 90-year history. It's well established in Canada in terms of metals, refining, and mining. Also known around the world in terms of its expertise in hydrometallurgical processing for base metals. But given that history, a lot of people have questions of what is Sherritt today. So today, Sherritt's predominant business is a significant producer of nickel and cobalt. We do this through our 50% ownership in a joint venture, the MOA joint venture. This consists of a mine and high-pressure acid leach, so a processing facility in MOA, Cuba, and also a refinery in Canada. It's located in Alberta, Fort Saskatchewan, which is just outside of Edmonton. In addition to this, in Alberta, we have a 100% owned fertilizer business, which produces agricultural fertilizers and sulfuric acid for sale into Western Canada. And finally, in Cuba, we have a energy business, or a power business, through our 1/3 ownership in Energas. This is a 500 megawatt of installed capacity, very significant in terms of the local grid, represents over 10% of the national grid, and it's a low cost and low carbon emitting power source because it comes from natural gas. So it's very important in terms of our relationships on island.
That's a great synopsis. So maybe diving further into the battery materials sector, what have you been seeing in the nickel and cobalt markets of late, and what's your outlook for those commodities?
Yeah, a lot of discussion, obviously, given batteries on nickel and cobalt. I'd start by saying a lot of what we've seen in the price or the volatility in those commodities has been supply side related. So both in nickel and cobalt, we've seen significant supply side growth over the last few years. In nickel, this has largely come out of intermediates coming out of Indonesia. And in cobalt, this has been out of the DRC and out of Indonesia. In the nickel side, though, more recently, there's been a lot of news on supply-side responses, whether it's New Caledonia, Australia, a variety of other high-cost producers, and a slowdown of some of the projects in terms of future growth. So we're seeing that market come more into, or at least relatively into balance, smaller oversupply in the short term. And we think with the demand growth there, we expect that demand will exceed supply and we'll start to see deficits in the sort of medium to long term. On the demand side, both commodities have actually been quite strong. So without that oversupply component, demand has actually been positive in nickel and in cobalt. Nickel, it's important to know, stainless steel still represents close to 70% of the nickel market, and this continues to grow, as it has pretty consistently over the last few decades. But the main topic is batteries. And the amount of nickel that goes into batteries, and still cobalt that goes into batteries, because cobalt is a relatively small market. So although there's a lot of discussion out there about pace of adoption of EVs or battery chemistries, we're still quite confident that NCM, or nickel-containing battery chemistries with some cobalt, will still be a significant portion of the market going forward. And actually, I think it's important to note that we do need other chemistries and other sources of supply in order to meet the magnitude of demand when you start looking at it 2030, 2040, 2050. So it was never going to be solved just by nickel chemistry batteries. So it's important to have a mix to actually hit those milestones.
I mean, it sounds like a robust outlook for sure, and it's definitely something that aligns well with what we're seeing with the downstream commitments from the auto manufacturers, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So maybe pivoting back to Sherritt, what's the company's outlook for this year? Are there any growth opportunities in the pipeline that you're particularly excited about that you can share with the audience?
Yeah, so we've obviously released our 2024 guidance, so we're expecting improved production. So we produce, or we're guiding towards a midpoint of around 32,000 tons of nickel contained in metals, and about 3,200 tons of cobalt. So this is a good improvement from last year. We expect our NDCC, so our operating costs, to come down. We're guiding US $5.50 to $6 per pound of nickel. So expect to see improved margins on that basis. On the growth side, we've been actively engaging on an expansion project on island to increase our intermediate production by about 20% of contained nickel and cobalt. So this should be the last year of finishing off that growth project, so we're excited about that and what it means in 2025. And then also, we turned around our power business in terms of finding excess gas supply. So what that really means in simple terms is we're actually starting to see dividends from our power business starting in the back half of this year, which we have not had for a long time. So just looking forward to receiving those dividends and being able to utilize them for some of our strategic goals.
Absolutely. And then obviously ESG, very important topic these days. What are some of Sherritt's sustainability goals, and what's the company doing to ensure that it's a responsible producer and supplier?
Yeah, I mean, it obviously has been a big topic, I guess, for a long time now, and I think one of the things that differentiates, well, I guess, Sherritt from from a lot of the junior market is we've been a producer for a long time. So sustainability type topics have been important because they've been important to the customer actually for a lot longer than they've been important to the capital markets. So we've always ensured that we've been reporting and tracking our sustainability initiatives for over 15 years. We've always ensured that we've met to international standards, whether it's currently towards sustainable mining or OECD compliance. We ensure that we're LME compliant because we have a brand on the LME and we can sell our metal to a variety of customers. So we do a lot of governance, a lot of management systems, a lot of sustainability efforts in that regard. I guess the big topic on sustainability more recently has been on GHG, carbon emitting aspects. So we have also set our 2050 net zero targets. We've set some interim targets in 2030, and then last year we completed a lot of our climate risk assessments and GHG assessments at our operations so that we can build a more detailed roadmap instead of just setting a target, actually having detailed plans on how to achieve it. So we're hoping to roll those out in more detail in the coming years.
Perfect. So, one thing that was obviously a momentous announcement for you guys was in 2022 you announced the cobalt swap arrangement with your Cuban partners, and that was aimed at settling some of the outstanding receivables. Can you give maybe the audience a little bit of an update in terms of how that's going, what progress has been made?
Yeah, I'd love to. It's complicated in structure, and it's proven so because we've tried to explain it, and it still requires extra explanation. But very simply, because of our historic power investments, we had $368 million of outstanding receivables from the original capital investment in those power businesses. So what we've done with this swap is our partners on the mining side have basically absorbed or taken on those receivables. And so what they've said is for the next 5 years, we get to use their 50% dividends to pay off that outstanding receivable. So Sherritt will effectively receive 100% of the dividends from the Moa joint venture up to $114 million US. So, give or take 150 million Canadian dollars each year, we get that prioritized dividend coming to us. So last year was our first year of it being in effect, and through cobalt, so physical metal dividends that we then sell, and through cash dividends, Sherritt received just over 145 million Canadian from this mechanism, and that resulted in around 76 million, because our partner's 50% interest, being reduced from the receivables. So it's very significant. This has been a long-standing issue of Sherritt for probably over a decade. So to actually have a mechanism where it's within our control through the Moa joint venture, through held offshore, and basically as there's dividends, we automatically receive it. It's built into the structure. So very significant in terms of changing the future of Sherritt.
For sure. I mean, it's going to be key in terms of strengthening the balance sheet and then helping you guys open the doors to some of the other growth initiatives that you have in the pipeline. Maybe on that topic, looking further ahead, what are your strategic initiatives over the next few years, and what plans do you guys have in place to achieve some of those?
Yeah, absolutely. You just mentioned balance sheet strengthening. A lot of the executive team came into place in 2021, and it's been a priority since then. It was a priority before, but it's been one of our priorities to deleverage the balance sheet. We did $150 million of debt repurchases and reduction in 2022, 2023. And that cobalt swap we talked about, that outstanding amount is basically equivalent to our outstanding debt as well. So very important in terms of basically being able to ensure we can either repay or refinance that debt. So that continues to be a priority for us, deleverage that. We've done that also through our growth initiatives. So we're very much looking forward to completing this expansion, which will give us increased margins, increased profitability, both towards balance sheet strength and towards growth opportunities. So that should be complete by the end of this year. We hope to see those proceeds or the benefits, the fruits of that in 2025. And then again, I mentioned the power business. We're starting to see dividends out of that. So that'll be really interesting. What we're hoping is what we believe is we've built this base. And so now we can actually use that to look towards growth opportunities. So at the end of Q1, we announced that we are developing a flow sheet or a refinery project for North America to treat, I was going to say MHP, which was luckily just talked about in the last presentation, so maybe people will understand it. So basically to treat an intermediate of nickel and cobalt into sulfate so it can feed into the battery sector, the battery supply chain. And so we're going to be building a facility and developing this facility that can treat international material, but then also be able to treat future domestic supply that comes from upstream mines. So really excited about being able to transition into that growth opportunity to expand Sherritt's business.
No, that sounds extremely exciting. Maybe just one on the government's perspective on critical minerals and how is that impacting your strategy, if at all?
Yeah, I think it's been. You've been at this conference. It's been fantastic in terms of the level of support and engagement that's coming out. Obviously, it continues to improve in terms of its coordination and how we're all getting aligned in that. You noted the amount of investment we've seen, particularly in provinces like Quebec or Ontario, in terms of the downstream industry, and it's starting to move into that midstream and upstream, which takes a little bit of time, and that's a very important component of that supply chain. So we're excited as that midstream starts to get built out and the funding and support and government alignment starts to really impact that sector. I think that'll be critical for us and others in the industry. So looking forward to that, and I think it's setting North America up to be a competitor in this space.
Agreed. And then maybe lastly, one of my favorite questions to ask in any fireside chat, why should someone sitting in the audience buy Sherritt? Why is it a great investment opportunity?
Yeah, and I know a lot of people start with undervalued story and all of that, and I think that's absolutely true. I think there's very few actual producing, nickel and cobalt companies out there. We have a long life asset, so more than 20 years. We recently expanded that. We have expansion coming up. And as we just talked about, we've really built the foundation again in terms of whether it's the cobalt swap to ensure the balance sheet. So we have a really strong foundation to grow from, good cash flow and profitability going forward. And then that expertise that we bring, both from an operating and technical perspective. So we talked about this MHP growth project, but we see a lot of opportunities come into Sherritt. And so as Sherritt improves our capability to then go after these opportunities, I think it's quite a bright future for us. Whereas a lot of the opportunities you see in the junior space are very interesting, but they sort of lack the capability in terms of the execution or the experience operating or actually building these facilities. And I think that will be important in terms of success going forward.
Perfect. Well, look, thank you very much for your time this morning. Thank you all in the audience as well. Great story and lots of exciting stuff on the come. So looking forward to seeing how that all unfolds.
No, thanks a lot, and thanks everyone.